We did a survey of our donors this last year, and two things came out of it. Tell me what you did with the money. Don't ask me again until you tell me what you did with the money I already gave. Even an organization, they know who we are, tell me what. And then if you want me to give in the future, share your vision and why my gift will be important of achieving that vision. Not just a need base, but why should I entrust you with my generosity? What's it really going to do in the future?
Welcome to the Philanthropy Masterminds podcast, brought to you by DonorSearch, the show that takes you inside the lives of thought leaders, innovators, and changemakers in fundraising, philanthropy, and civil society. I'm your host, Jay Frost. Bill Littlejohn is a nationally recognized leader in healthcare philanthropy. As Senior Vice President and CEO of the Foundations of Sharp Healthcare, he has driven initiatives raising more than $300 million and spearheaded Sharp's $2 billion ENVISION campaign to transform healthcare in San Diego. A former AHP chair and Seymour Award recipient, Bill has advised healthcare systems worldwide and is widely celebrated for his visionary leadership and impact. In this wide-ranging conversation, we explore his beginnings in the field, the work he and his colleagues have done over the years, the critical importance of continual innovation, and his personal commitment to philanthropy.
And I've been thinking about hosting a philanthropy summit at our place before and bring some of the thought leaders in and say, do we all need a Moonshot?
Right.
Where we collapse. And I said, so look, and make it agnostic. The HP consultants come in. Everybody and said, here are the big issues. Spend a day. The donor crisis, what everybody's talking about, talent and tenure, things like that. Digital transformation, we're all going through it. We can't ignore that, and traditions have to kind of change and all of that. And then what could be some outcomes the next day or whatever, and say, could there be a collaboration where you and you guys, and then and I said, look, if there was a big, huge initiative that lays out that we're going to train people, we're going to move philanthropy up where, or if it was healthcare, even just in healthcare, we'd put $1 million in if it was going to improve us, we're going to get another 2x increase. We'd pay for it and say, yeah, bring it on. And I said, I like it if the Apollo mission, when Apollo came along, they couldn't have one company do the whole thing. It was way too big. So you look at all those consultants and everything, it's like partner up, and it's like you guys do this, and now we're doing that in our tech roadmap. That we're looking at applications and working with IT and donor portal. So a different giving platform. We use Razor's Edge, but then a giving platform and email and this and that and all of those things. And so that's what healthcare systems do. So anyway, it's just fun to think about that and whether that would be whether it's pie in the sky and nobody will. But I even said that to like Alice Ayers. I said, if you came up with a really great strategic plan, you should bring the 50 or 60 thought leaders together to Chicago and get them to buy it. And saying, we're paying $22,000 a year for Prime AHP, which is okay, but then we have to pay to go to the conference too. That's why we have so many people that don't always travel. But are we getting $30,000 or $40,000 worth of benefit out of that membership? I'm like, it's hard to. At the same time, we put $1 million in at the start of our campaign on video, on our website, on marketing, and on a big kickoff event. And we've done great. We've raised $170 million of the $250 million in the first 4 years. We really realized that was a great investment to make. I was like, well, that's a lot of money. I'm like, you can't spend that money on advertising. I said, well, we branded the campaign and it made a huge difference. So the same thing. And so anyway, it's just fun to think about all that kind of stuff.
It sounds like you've got as much energy for this now as you did when I first met you, which was a while ago now, and that you've had for this throughout your tenure at Sharp. But you're talking about succession and you're talking about retirement. What's the genesis of that?
One was, I'm not getting any younger. And I've been at Sharp. It's a couple of things is that, including my consulting time, it's been like 27 years at Sharp. So I've also now gone through a couple of executive level retirements and transitions. So, the people that I started with have moved on, and now there's another kind of realm. And in fact, that the board went to the senior team and said, we want you to have succession plans, whatever it is. And so at the time, that was 3 years ago, and I'm like, okay, I'll put down 5 years. And that, because I really targeted out that my daughter would graduate from college, sort of, the kids would be done with financing all the education, and they would be sort of on their own. And that I would have put in the better part of 30 years at Sharp between consulting and full time, and have, I think, achieved what I would think would be the legacy that I would like, and would hand off a program in pretty good shape. And then the idea, and go back and do some consulting too, for a few years, because I really enjoyed it. I still kind of do that today, board retreats and all of the conferences, caring is sharing. And so it was kind of, that was, and I thought my age group, I turned 65 last year, so Medicare comes along and Social Security and all of that. I'm like, I think it was, and also to make sure we could have a good succession plan that get the right people to take over and lead it for the next generation. So it's been a multi-year consideration of that. But I knew, probably 10 years ago, at least, that I would finish my career at Sharp. So it was just, and it's not one of those things that, okay, I'll give you, 3 months or something. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and retire. It's like, no, I want to make sure there's a pretty long, roadmap for people to support the board and the leadership.
I've already started recording,
good.
that's great, because you just shared a lot, and I can use that.
You can cut whatever you want. Yeah,
sure. I often with the podcast, I ask people about the whole arc of their career and their life. Right. Regardless of where they are in it. So I didn't mean to start with retirement. So I'm glad you approached that, because we can then go backwards and then return to it. But I do want to ask you, before I begin with the other questions, if there's anything you would like to avoid or don't want to talk about.
No, really. Okay. No.
Great. I just want to make sure I honor that.
Yeah. No, good.
Especially since, we met personally through the work at Santa Fe Christian.
That's right.
Which was a totally different way to get to know you and your work.
Right. And as a volunteer, board chair, board member, and on the other side, making decisions about, professionals to engage to help the institution in its next steps and its future.
And that's where your kids were.
Yeah, that's where they're, and now, and they were done. And so they were two lifers. We spent 16 years there, and I give them huge credit for where they've gone in college and career-wise. Is that was one of the best decisions we made, was to have them the opportunity to attend Santa Fe Christian and have what was poured into them at that time, and was worth the investment we made, both through tuition but also philanthropy. We supported. I was on the development committee, on the board, and then worked with you to sort of help do the planning for the big initiative, which they've moved forward on the first phase. The building is done. They've raised a pretty good chunk of money. Then they've got more to do. But that plan helped in terms of their future, and now I see it from afar. I mean, their kids aren't there, but I get the reports, and I talk to people that still have kids there. So that's another great legacy piece. Is I was part of the institution in both a volunteer and service role at the same time as my kids were, getting the benefits of the school. So.
I had a sense with that too, that you had a plan. I seem to remember you talking about, well, the kids are here, they're going to stay through.
Right.
It's worked well for them. And then when they're done, I'll be rotating off the board. Very much this kind of discipline about your own personal professional life plan.
Well, that's a great point, Jay, in that that was part of my decision to go to Sharp. Was I was, as a consultant, I was doing great work, enjoyed the client. Sharp was a client, and great colleagues, did a lot of work at HP, all of that, and colleagues and friends I know to this day. It was great. And of course, Sharp made an offer to me to take the job. And originally I declined because I enjoyed the consulting, and they weren't where I might wanted them to be, because I was telling them all of that. And they said, well, we continue to consult together. But then my son had been born, and he was about a year old, and I had another one on the way. And I said, I really don't want to do that kind of travel. I want to see my kids grow up. I don't want to leave at 4 a.m. and get home at 10 and not be part of that. So, and then Sharp said that was the right decision. And so the idea to take the job at Sharp and pack up, and then ultimately to stay at Sharp, one, because it's a great organization and they supported myself, the team, and the philanthropic program immensely. And then, of course, my kids could grow up in one place and they could, and so at the end of the day, it was like, okay, I'm going to stay here because the kids are at Santa Fe Christian. Sharp's given me a great runway to do the work we want to do and take the long view, do a much more strategic work than just raise a bunch of money. And so that fit sort of perfectly. So, I didn't, at the time, when I took the job, I didn't know it would be the last stop. You never do. And I was just, in my early mid 40s. And so, but I look back and here I've now spent, between the consulting and the full time, 27 years. And when it's all done, it'll be about 30 years, of the, nearly 50 I will have spent in philanthropy. Right. But at the same time, I've only had 3 employers in that. Right now, I'm in 42 years, the American Cancer Society and the consulting work, and then Sharp.
And this, like you said, that's the anomaly in this field, where people rotate in and out every 18 to 24 months. And
there's some people with some great tenure, but you're right, and that's not just in healthcare philanthropy. That's in the industry, and there's lots of reasons for it. The shops are small, and if you look for promotion, you kind of move on. We've had not really barriers to entry, and we hire people in that have some interesting background, but may not the right characteristics, and they don't fit perfectly, or there's different expectations between performance of what the person we hire thinks, or we go hire ourselves, whatever, and then issues with boards or executives or other people. It's a whole combination of things, and I think it is the most challenging in the major gift field. Not so much even chief development officer, because that's sort of kind of an ill-defined function where you have various different type. Major gift officer is much more in the social kind of friendly, lots of interaction, and then others are very disciplined and rigorous about that. Moves management and doing really effective major gift work. And I think I try to think of myself in that category, and even today that I like to have great relationships or even friendships, but if I meet with somebody, the whole purpose is it's about philanthropy at Sharp Healthcare. That's what it's versus, I'm going to spend a lot of time doing other types of things. Now, we all have to but it's really interesting how and if you think about that, all the major gift training that's been done over the years, it's kind of morphed. And now we have virtual major gift work that, we always thought everything had to be done in person. You had to meet everybody where they are. You had to go to their place, come to them. They had to write personal notes, and now you send them a text. And you'll have a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, and you can ask for a very big gift. And you wouldn't have thought of ever doing that, 25 years ago.
But it sounds like that's a comfortable place for you. You've embraced it.
I feel that I've sort of kept on that leading edge, and that, and fundraising is great, but it's attached to legacy. But it also flips around that it's that, we don't change because we've always done it that way. We've always done the event. We've always sent the invitation out on X date, and it's got 4 colors. And I said, well, and I says, the first thing people do when they get up in the morning is they look at their phone. They don't go to the mailbox and pick up the mail. And so we should be sending the invitation on and have it formatted so you can read it on a device. It's like, well, we've always done it this way. I'm like, yeah, you can continue to do it that way. I've been talking a lot about digital transformation that's going on, not just in philanthropy or healthcare. It's going on in the world, and I saw a report from the Federal Reserve that they said that sometime after 2030, commercial check writing in the United States will be all but done. Down to, I say, well, most people pay their bills online. They use Venmo. They give money to their kids. They don't write checks. It's still it happens. We're not at 2030 yet. But we built whole fundraising programs on paper. We built them in envelopes and letters and response devices and checks and check processing and invitations and reports and letters and all it's still part of that. But that's all, it's transforming. And it's not just as much, we have to have a website with online giving. You have to transform the functions you're doing into a new world. And so And that takes resources and expertise and time, but that's what that's what banks have done, and that's what airlines have done. You can't get a book with all the flight guide anymore. It's all, we go right online to do that. So, but many of us have been trained in that conditioning. Everything was personalized, and it was you give something to somebody, give them a brochure, and it's like, well, that's not the most. You can still do it, but it's probably not the most efficient or effective. So how do we, and then that's all, but now it's also what's great about that though, is this next generation, that's all they're accustomed to. So they'd come in and say, why are we sending out an invitation on the mail? So I know, we use Evite, all the parties I've ever gone to. So we're in that kind of cross of, in the generations, and those are and that's one of the things, I'm a baby boomer, so I don't want to look like I'm just an old guy, like, oh, Bill's, old fashioned guy, and doesn't even know how to turn on his phone. I said I wasn't going to be that way because, but that's a really interesting thought process, and it's not just but it takes a strategic approach to it that we all have to transition our institutions, but also even the functions of what we were trained to do.
And these changes have been occurring throughout our lives, so being adaptable is important. Let's go way back.
Oh, yeah.
Because you talked about what we were trained to do. You were trained in economics. I mean, we've talked about UVA because UVA is another family tradition. It's
and it's a very traditional place.
Merging tradition with innovation. But where were you living at the time? What brought you to UVA?
Well, I grew up in Northern Virginia, in McLean, Virginia, just outside of D.C. And after my parents had gotten married up in Providence, Rhode Island, where my dad went to Brown University, they ended up settling in Northern Virginia because my grandfather had been living there, and my dad moved down there, and my mom, and he took a job in the government. So he spent his entire career they worked at Health, Education, and Welfare and USAID and places like that, and was a personnel investigator. So they settled in Northern Virginia, and ultimately had 6 children. But there was already a UVA tradition because my father's brother had gone to University of Virginia, and then also my aunt had gone to nursing school there. So there was already started. And then, of course, when you're in Virginia, the opportunity to go to UVA, it's a great school, and it's a state school, and it was very affordable for in-state students. It still is to some degree, and very much for us. So in the end, 4 of the 6 children went to the University of Virginia. I had a sister who went to William & Mary, and my brother went to Ohio University. So the tradition started, and so it was the idea that UVA was the first choice, and so I ultimately got accepted. But it's really interesting when I did my application for UVA, I put down I wanted to major in history and go to law school. I didn't do either, but I enjoyed history, and I thought, well, be lawyer, but I didn't know what I wanted to do really. And so ultimately, when I got to UVA, that I certainly took some classes in history and things, but gravitated pretty quickly to economics because it's such a great background in terms of not just business, but it's thought and logic and analysis and lots of graphs and charts. But it created that sort of analytical thinking for you, trained you in some of that. And UVA taught classical economics, but also theory, other price theory and things like that. So it was a great background. But at the same time, I had an orientation toward some, community service, and, I had obviously being in the DC area, political campaigns and things were of interest. I interned for 2 summers at the State Department when I was in college. It really was great, and I actually took the Foreign Service exam, and then I moved to Richmond for a project. But I was quite interested in potentially becoming a Foreign Service officer. So I really didn't know what I wanted to do with that degree when I got out of school. Whether go into banking but I ended up with a fraternity brother and others that got involved in the Virginia gubernatorial campaign. And Virginia does off-year campaigns, and so they get national interest. Virginia and New Jersey are the only 2 states that don't do them. They do them in odd years.
And you can only serve one term.
Serve one term. They're big time, yes. And they're right next to DC. They're big time. Mm-hmm. So they hire big, and they're bigger today. But I ended up getting involved working for the Attorney General who was running for governor. I just became a travel aide. So I traveled all around the state, moved to Richmond, and it's one of those things. It was a campaign, not a fundraising campaign. There were other people doing that, although I did have to tell the candidate, it's time to make your fundraising calls, sit down and go do that. In those days, it's like, you'll make your calls. Now, of course, they send the emails, but met a lot of people, did great. And actually, then a colleague of mine who was on the campaign as a field rep, he got recruited to do another campaign in California. And I'm like, okay, I'm 22, 23 years old. I got nothing to do. Well, I'll go out and work with you as a campaign director person, in San Mateo County, south of San Francisco in 1982, and worked on that campaign. But, campaigns are, just very intense work for 6 or 7, 9 months. Now they're, of course, multiple years. But back then it was, quite different. But still, it was still campaigning. And like, okay, now you got to get a real job. The candidate I worked for did not win, and so there wasn't like a work in the office and all of that. And so I went back to D.C. and I'm like, now what am I going to do? And so I had a brother who had moved to Los Angeles, and I'd worked in California. So I thought, let's see what might work in California. So I ultimately applied for a job at the American Cancer Society in Pasadena for like an associate executive director.
Did you have any kind of connection to cancer or the society?
No. Fortunately, our family's not had much of that. No, I had, and I was 23, 24. But it was, I had done community service in my fraternity. I helped organize fundraising events, and of course worked on this campaign, which was, it's the meeting people, it's passing out stuff, it's doing that kind of, it's not, fundraising, nonprofit work, but it's the same concept. And that, I didn't want to just go to doing banking and become, it was, I did, or Wall Street or something like that. It was like, no, that doesn't. And so, but they ultimately interviewed me for this job in Pasadena, and they didn't hire me, but they said they really liked me, and they wanted me to eventually to take on a fundraising role because of my background, and they had an interim role for communications marketing for a few months and do that. So I'm like, all right, I'm not tied down anywhere. So I packed up my cardboard boxes and flew out and spent a few weeks with my brother in Santa Monica and took the job at the American Cancer Society in Pasadena as an assistant director of development after this interim job, and then spent 9 years there.
I'm thinking that not being familiar with community service, but not necessarily fundraising, not in a professional role, that must have been quite a big switch.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was California, a place I'd never lived. Sure. But I give credit to the Cancer Society. Obviously, it's always been a big organization and done lots of fundraising activities, especially in the direct response and special events, low dollar, high volume. Everybody support the Cancer Society. It was 40 years ago, so there weren't anywhere near as many kind of charities out there, and there wasn't all the internet and everything else. So it was a lot of, going to places and, everything, setting up card tables to working with local community groups and things like that. So yeah, I started doing a golf tournament where, the entry fee was $50 and then of course the Cancer Society would, like other big health organizations, they were real pioneers in big direct response. And that goes back to the 60s and 70s. And so, they, millions of pieces of mail in that, they were that, and that really, if I think about it, sort of the zenith of the whole direct response before the internet was like the 80s and 90s, where, and you built, and I ended up running the California division's direct response program of about 6 million pieces of mail a year. Oh, wow. And it was quite sophisticated with all kinds of segmentation, and we worked with vendors who do the computer. We used to rent lists, people still do some of that, and we worked with brokers, and we had people who managed all the mails, and it was huge. We had content people, but it raised us a lot of money, and it acquired us all the donors. direct response became the acquisition tool that built these big donor bases. And so those big national health organizations did that. And so it was a great experience, and worked in the fundraising data system that ACS developed, and had a lot of opportunities both at the local, state, and ultimately national level. So it was a great fundraising training ground because they had classes and programs, because they're a big national organization. They sent you to conferences, not just on fundraising, but on being a manager and interviewing skills and those types of things. And
that's unique also.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty sure they do some of that. But yeah, I got a lot of training, and not just in fundraising skills, but also, executive, because I became a manager or director or assistant vice president and all of that. And so there was a lot of that. So in my 20s, I got this whole kind of fundraising. And I said, to this day, I really give a lot of credit to the, rest in peace, the legendary Hank Russo of the original fundraising school that's now at Indiana University. He ran it out of his house in San Rafael, California for years. And I went to the fundraising school in 1984 in Mills College. And I have the black notebook, and I've got that cube still. But that's where it was a week-long program, but it was the best program of learning about fundraising, the pyramid of giving, the motivations for giving, major gift work, direct response, planned gifts, all of that. Yeah, it's old typed up notebook pages I still have. And to this day, it still is that fundamental course at the time in my career when I'm, 25 or 26 years old, and just really getting going, laid a really good groundwork. And, and it was, you didn't think about it at the time, but you look back on it. I mean, I've done a lot since then, but that sort of baseline and then being at an organization that would embrace some of those practices really gave me the groundwork to, and I think if I look back and say, are we doing that today?
Right.
In sufficient dynamic?
Do you mean the training or that process?
Everything, or both the institutions or the field,
right.
Saying in the first, and we tried to do that at HP with the pathway, but not the first, 6 months of onboarding, but the first 6 years. And are people getting, now the organizations have to be big enough or whatever, but I think the training I got then, both internally at ACS, but through like the fundraising school, and then I subscribed to Fundraising Magazine and Direct Response, and I went to a few other conferences and programs and really honed in and became an adult learner and kind of learned. But that was the formative years that put the career to where I wasn't going to shift and say, okay, now I'm going to go run a restaurant or something, or go work in a bank. I had found that opportunity, and so that gave me a really great baseline of work and education, and then practice development, and some innovation. Innovation in the database system. We actually worked with Arthur Anderson, which is long gone now, at the national level to try to design the new database. And I think at the time, I believe Blackbaud Razor's Edge was just getting going. And that
they were turning from FundMaster.
Yeah, FundMaster, and then there was Donor Perfect was one of the original kind of software companies. So it's really interesting. It'd be great. I'm sure people have written some of that history, but and that was all during the 1980s. I started at ACS in '83 and left there in '92. So everything, all that's, and just at the '92 is when you're just getting into the internet stuff. And so, we moved from old batch processing by hand to PC-based, like using DBase 3 for our gift processing. That would have been in the mid to late 80s. And then we went to the national data system was being done like around 1990, 91 or so. So, yeah, then of course, in the 90s, you really get the big shift to the internet and to, much bigger systems, so that for my first decade was not, internet based and not with no web. There was no web dynamic. And so you did that raw fundraising. You sent out mailings, you did acknowledgement letters, you called people. We had phone-a-thons, we had volunteers come in. We used to, ACS did old residential programs, like the Mother's March of Dimes, where recruited volunteers to go door to door.
Right.
And then they went neighbor to neighbor and passing kits and people putting donations in a big envelope, and you recruited people to be your block chairman. I mean, it's impossible to think of that today. But a lot of those big national health organizations did that. They recruited, thousands of volunteers, many of them, mothers and people who weren't raising kids, but they became and even the American Cancer Society called its big campaign the Crusade. And they had, they built it like a military. They had units and divisions. They called it, that's what the names of the organization was, not chapters, units and divisions. It was like a big military structure. And then you worked with these big groups or you tried to work with big groups of volunteers. It's fascinating when I think about it now, but that's what you did back then.
So some of the things that we've been talking about have to do with technology and kind of testing those out, using them while they're useful, moving on to new things. But some of this is also just about the things that work and have worked since Hank Russo. What remains the same? So when it comes to anything from the donor pyramid to the contact that you have with individuals about supporting an organization to whatever, what's the most consistent?
It's a great point and consideration. So to this day, we do big campaigns and we talk about, that I've always said is that there's two reasons why a fundraising campaign succeeds, and there's the inverse of that is why they don't. It's usually not the case for support or the institution. It's not like, well, that it's not that the Heart Center isn't a good project, or that, Sharp is not a great organization. That's not usually not it. If that was it, you wouldn't be doing the campaign. You'd be trying to solve that issue first. And the reason is that, and the reason it succeeds, you ask enough people who have the capability of giving. And second thing, you do it in the most effective way. Now, in the old days, it was in person. Education before asking. Structured assets, very, very well laid out in terms of how to give, recognition, how much, all those things. And then follow up, to close the gift. And we used to use, and we still do to this day, about the John D. Rockefeller's speech, junior speech from 1933 about the technique of soliciting. That's still today. Now, how you do it today using different technology and platforms, but you still got to do it. So even today, you got to use social media or email or texting or cool stuff to educate and cultivate the relationship. And then you have to put before them the opportunity to give. And the reasons that doesn't work is because they don't get it to enough people. They don't, or they punt and just send a letter. I ran the direct mail program. We had to ask, and even we were pleased with a 2% response rate in direct mail. But we want to get a 70 or 80% response rate in major gift work because we do it all in person, really well done. And it gives us the big gifts. And it actually, in the end of the day, there's still the aspect you have to ask, but it gets at you have to do it effectively. And then the challenge, even more so today, is getting attention of people. And that's where we're bombarded with devices and everything else. And they said, we used to train people, said, you in order to get big gifts from big donors, you have to get their attention. And then power and influence will do that. That's why you use volunteers who could say, Jay, I know you respect me. If it's just anybody else, and Jay can just simply say, oh no, I'm just way too busy to do that. So, and that's even more the challenge today, is getting people's attention, because we are loaded with bombardment of information and attention grabbing.
But a lot of
24 hours a day.
Kind of shallow attention, shallow touch points.
It's not way shallow.
The depth of those relationships.
That's what this donor crisis is about. People saying that, the surveys are showing that less than half the households are giving today.
Right.
40 years ago, when I started the Cancer Society, the report on giving, the AAFRC, I guess it is, report that was gone then. I think the report that reflected giving of 300,000 organizations, nonprofit 501c3s, federally registered. Now there's closing in on 2 million.
Right. And I think 75% of the people gave, or something close to that.
And that's a 400% increase. Yet the population of the United States has only increased by 40%. So everybody's getting asked all the time, every day, and, in every possible way, by email and TV and everything else. I mean, we used to do, it was a unique thing to have the Jerry Lewis telethon. Now many organizations are doing that every night, asking for $11 a month or $19 a month. The Shriners and St. Jude's and Tonal Towers, and it's great. And that's what their fund is, that, and you've got 100 cable channels you can put that on. So, it was really interesting, people saying that in those, we just finished the election, in those 7 swing states, those people, poor people, got inundated basically 24 hours a day on television, on text, and on email from political campaigns, both asking for money or asking for their vote. And they're like, thank God it's over. But I mean, what do? You can't, even in San Diego, I think there's an estimate, there's more than 14,000 nonprofit organizations. Well, how would you even know who they are and what they do? So yet everyone has a website and everyone can send out email. What's
the net effect, do you think, then, on those people in those swing states getting all those messages, or all the people in San Diego now hearing from 14,000?
Well, what happens?
Well,
it's right. Well, everything else takes a hit, and people just say no. They say, I'm not going to do anything. And then you're right, it's become very shallow and very transactional. Giving Tuesday, that's a great thing, but it's transactional. It's like, you give today because it's Tuesday. What's it for? And we did a survey of our donors this last year, and 2 things came out of it. And that's been a tried and true thing. They said, acknowledge me, which is great, send me a note, thank me, give me a receipt, whatever. tell me what you did with the money. Don't ask me again until you tell me what you did with the money I already gave. Even an organization, they know who we are. Tell me what, and then if you want me to give in the future, share your vision and why my gift will be important of achieving that vision. Not just a need base, but why should I entrust you with my generosity? Is what's it really going to do in the future? And so, but we've gotten into this asking and asking and asking, very shallow. And then people, and I think they did a survey once of showing that 50% of the people only give once to an organization because they would say, and they never really told me what they did with my gift. Now, granted, if it's a big gift for a project, I understand that. But most money is still given in small amounts, and it goes into the kind of the black hole. And so, and then they never get a sense. So they never develop a true institutional relationship. It just becomes this transactional one, give again, give again, give again. It's year end. Make a gift at year end. We now make sure that we go back to even all of our unrestricted donors, and especially in our annual report and other communication, and tell them what we did with your $50 gift was combined with many others. And we transferred from our unrestricted money, which you gave, $1 million to help us build this new patient tower. You can be proud that you're part of it. Sure, we got $1 million gift to name something, but we also took $1 million and gave it back. We spend more of our communications not on, and we do it thanking people, but not on how much we raised. It's what we distributed.
And then have you found a way to check back and make sure that they've received that impact statement message?
Yeah, well, that's the other big challenge today is that when you're doing things electronically, one of the most important things you look at even in a newsletter is your open rates. And and back in the old days, we know that in direct mail, people just threw the mail away. They always used to say, what should you put on the envelope? Because you wanted to open the envelope. Then you wanted to read the letter. Then you wanted to take the response device. Then you went to fill out the response device. And then you wanted to put it in a mailing. Then do you want to put a self-addressed stamped envelope, or you want to put it in? Like all these steps they had to go through. Now what they can do? QR code and go right to the giving page. So you're exactly right. And that because we're using these new digital platforms to educate, cultivate, and solicit, how effective, what's the open rate for that newsletter, and what's the click through, and then what's the call to action. So we still have steps to go through, and we can measure those today. So that's an important thing that organizations will need to do is look at the new analytics, the new KPIs versus just the response rate from a piece of direct mail. Is that, in the end of the day, you're right. And so, so even today we say, well, we probably ought, for this group, we probably should send both a letter and an email because, the email can easily get lost in the other 100 emails that we all get or get, put into bulk or junk mail files. Right. And so all of that, and now with this massive number of organizations, we are flooded, and I'm a donor too, and I get the same thing. So back to your almost first question, what our objective is, we don't have to be number one, but we would like to think that we're in the top 3 to 5 philanthropic choices for people. We thank people or congratulate them if they give to the museum or they give to the church, and they tell us that. It's like, you're philanthropic, because we're worried about half the population not even giving at all. But then and so the end of the day is that, and so that we appreciate. And so if we think that we can establish a good relationship, even to the point that they don't have to give every single year, but they can become part of the Sharp giving family and become loyal to us, and we can nurture that relationship over a period of time so that ultimately they can, that we can have a philanthropy dynamic that is retained and grows. And so, I'd say there's only 3 ways you raise money, not special events, and not direct. You acquire a donor, you retain them, and you grow them. The reason that religion raised so much money for so long, less today because there's less people going to church than there was, and that's demographics and other things, but they asked for money every week in person. And then they also had people fill out envelopes with checks. I learned giving from my parents, who would, when we'd go to church, remember you'd pick up the box of envelopes and it had your name, had a little sticker with your family's name on it. And you would put your $20 check in the envelope and you put it in the plate. And if you missed a church, you could put right for $40, or you could put 2 checks in the next time. Well, I give today to my church, but I give it through my checking account every week. And now my church is on YouTube, so I don't even have to go physically. We do, but also it's like, oh, if we're late, but I can watch it and I can interact and I can take communion. But I know that they will still get my contribution whether I watch it, go there, or don't do anything. That's what you're seeing. A lot of these organizations is looking to replace the religious money in the plate with $11 a month, $19 a month through EFT, through a online giving page, through Venmo, whatever it might be, recurring giving.
You've talked about service. I mean, you were involved in service organizations early on. I think that was probably a part of even attending church.
Oh, sure.
The Episcopal Church back.
It was Presbyterian Church.
So there was always a service element. I know you mentioned that before. There was historically a service element to people's involvement in giving,
right?
Especially through the big service organizations. You mentioned hospitals like Shriners is a great example of this. Rotary, which I believe you're in.
I'm a member of Rotary, and I'm a Paul Harris Fellow. I'm a donor to Rotary as well.
But we've also seen a decline in these spaces. Do you have any thoughts about what, besides the fact that we've barraged people with email and text messages, what may be happening here, and how are you addressing it at Sharp?
That's such an interesting kind of historical. There was a book or something written about there's few bowling leagues left.
Bowling Alone, I think.
Yeah, Bowling Alone it was. And I was in a bowling league as a kid.
Right.
And it was like that was both a social, it wasn't a fundraising thing, but people did bowling. Mm-hmm. And there were lots of service clubs. When you were younger, there was the Key Club in schools. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's the Lions and all of that. And they're still around, but others have, because the idea of we've become very somewhat independent, and our group dynamic is now in social media. And you have friends and, on Facebook that, are they really your friends? There's people I'm friends with that I have never met and probably never will meet, but there's some connection to that. So that's a really great point because, inspiration is the essence of philanthropy, and giving impacts giving. And people you join a campaign, you join a family of donors. So you make a great point, but now with all of this, transactional and not personal from a standpoint of seeing people or going to a meeting or going to, so we want to do both. We have a real plan to do both, to where yes, we want people to join the family of donors and communicate with them effectively, be part, lots of communication, education, and stewardship that makes you feel part of not just a donor, but you're part of the Sharp family. And then but then also we don't want to do it just all digitally. We want to make sure that we have opportunities for education or stewardship or socialization at the institution. And we have a new Innovation Education Center, and we've already done several educational events or stewardship events, and they've been great. And part of it was we did one for the Jewish Community Foundation in San Diego, which is a great organization. They have a huge impact. But we brought a number of their donors and their leaders over, and we had a presentation from several physicians, leaders, and it was amazing. Even sophisticated donors afterwards saying, "Wow, I didn't know all the stuff that you guys do." I said, "You really wouldn't unless we showed you, and you're not supposed to know that, and we don't have to ask the Jewish Community Foundation leaders to say, hey, you need to give this to all your people." And that we could have asked that, and then nobody would have read it. But when we brought you over, now whether that leads to, so in the end of the day, we have to say to ourselves, there are people who give. It's why they have alumni associations in universities, is that you're part of a club, and they have donor clubs, but we want them not just to be part of a donor club because they gave X amount of money, but they're part of the Sharp family, and we're educated. Our board members love being board members because they're great volunteers, but they love being insiders in the organization. They love learning about all the cool things about healthcare, all the challenges. They love hearing from the CEO or a doctor. I said, I never would have known this otherwise. So even today, our biggest job with board directors is cultivation and education and letting them be great ambassadors, not being governors and having to try to manage this big word. But you raise a great point that the world's changed, and that now it's like there's Facebook groups, but there's not bowling leagues.
No. Well, there's another piece to this too, which is that the nature of the campaign itself or fundraising activity has become so focused on a small group of people rather than the collective. I get the impression that what you've done with Sharp is a little bit different, because you've raised or they have given, I guess it's both, a vast sum of money. And I remember you telling me years ago about this kind of $100 million campaign on almost an annualized basis for 10 years. Right. That was a different kind of campaign. It wasn't all, you were going to do everything in 2 years.
No, it's
exhaust everyone.
It's the aspect that it's the long-term view. And you raise a great point, is that, here we are teaching people in philanthropy about legacy and about the donor pyramid, and you don't go up the pyramid in 6 months. It takes 60 years sometimes. Yet we try to do these fundraising programs like overnight, like do a challenge or do a campaign in 6 months, and create momentum and all of that. But at the same time, organizations like Sharp don't move that way. We don't build buildings in 6 months. We don't transform the organization. They're like battleships. It takes a long time for them to turn around. And so,
is that an advantage in in a way?
It's a great advantage.
If you're talking long-term for people, are they more invested in the ideas than if you just said, we're going to build a building tomorrow?
Completely. Like me with my tenure. For so long, we've done kind of two things in the world of fundraising, not just healthcare. We've done the annual fund kind of thing. Give to the annual fund because we're going to do this. Everything from send a kid to camp to provide for a scholarship to do whatever. And then we do a campaign. And the campaign would be for this or that or a multiple of things. And we try to compress the campaign so they're much longer today. And then when the campaign's over, we go back to the annual fund thing. So we said, that's not really strategic. That's, episodic, including the campaign. So we need to have, and what we went down and say, what is the institutional role of philanthropy in driving excellence at Sharp Healthcare? And so Sharp Healthcare has to be successful every year, and it has to invest in every year. And so the same thing with philanthropy, but it has to be viewed over as a long-term dynamic. So and even for us, it said we not just want to raise money and distribute it. We want to build the balance sheet of deferred gifts that will be cashed out in future years, and that we want loyal donors that will be loyal to us, not every year, some every year, but over their lifetime. And that's going up the pyramid. We want our own donor pyramid, and that's the Sharp would like people to be patients for the rest of their lives. We want to keep them out of the hospital, but we'd like to take care of you for the rest of your. We want you to be in our network, and so we want to create not just grateful patients, but loyal patients to the organization and of course through philanthropy. And I've likened that to what's the concept of like the frequent flyer programs, which in the end of the day when they were started, back like in the 80s, and for example, I've been a long time United flyer, and that it was all about customer loyalty, so they would spend money at United. And if you give them enough benefits, they go out of their way to fly. And I've done that. It's like, but days I can hate United, but I get enough benefits, I'll go back. And the same time, but they've also learned, for a while, it was a struggle for them, and some of them trying to get rid of some of it because they had huge liabilities on all these miles people had accrued, but they fixed, and they've used the digital dynamic. So today, United Airlines has a great relationship with me electronically. I don't know anybody, but boy, do they send me not just emails, but when I travel, they tell me when my flight's if it's delayed. If I want to order something on the plane, your bag's going to be at terminal this and that they're using. And so I got this personal relationship with this great big huge place, and then I'm also getting additional benefits on top of it. So I'm going to be loyal to them for the rest of my life. Do
we have an equivalent?
I think alumni associations try to do that, and universities, and you're always alumni. Hospitals are not quite that way, but I think every organization has an opportunity to say, we have a long-term vision and plan, and we have things we want to do today and tomorrow in the future, and we'd like you to be a partner with us forever. And we'd also have to accept that not everybody can have everybody in it. There's too many nonprofits. And say, and that's to say is that, so I'm absolutely fine if we're number 3 or number 5, but we're not number 27. And, I think we sort of saw that in COVID too, that you had people, we had lots of outside donors, they didn't stay around, and that's okay. I mean, they supported hospitals because it was an important thing to do. We got some to keep. But you raise a great point, Jay, that, shouldn't that be our strategy? And I think this gets to the point that, every institution, whether it's a pure fundraise, should have a strategic philanthropy plan, not even a fundraising plan. It's philanthropy, and the role of philanthropy in the institution, and how you elevate it, how you acquire, retain, and grow donor relationships. And I think that, and then also that relates then to talent and tenure, how you train people to do those functions, and then you kind of smooth the curve, because you're not going to raise all the money one year, and versus you get all kind of we had a bad year, you got to fire everybody or whatever it is. At the end of the day is that, but then again, you have to overlay both these principles that I learned 40 years ago from Hank Russo to this brave new world of digital and communication challenges and attention and how platforms and everything else that just aren't, they're not efficient or effective as they were before. They're just not. And that, like I said, is that direct mail, in fundraising, its days are probably numbered.
Right.
I mean,
you are you're keeping very fresh as you do all this work. That's what you do.
I had to.
Well, everybody should, but you definitely do. And I'm wondering if you are also, because of that, because you're so close to it, the innovation, if you're seeing a change in the nature of the donors themselves. Maybe it's generational, maybe it's everybody, in terms of how they're interacting with us, not just with the technologies that they choose or when they choose to give, or if it's monthly or not, or if it's a campaign or not, but how they feel about us, this relationship of trust that we try to foster. Are you seeing a change?
Big issue. There's been surveys saying nonprofit trust is eroded.
Yeah.
Trust in certain institutions have eroded. And part of it is certainly our fault, right? And especially ones like for philanthropy. That is a learned dynamic. I mean, there are people who are pure philanthropists who just, they're the Mother Teresa's of the world, that they are just, but they're few and far between. Like I said, I learned the philanthropy from my parents, and the fact not just giving like to the church, but my parents volunteered and did stuff, and they got us involved with Memorial Day services at the American Legion, and and helping out and doing stuff. And then I got involved in college, and of course we were in a place where civil service, and so there clearly are societal changes. For example, the government has become huge. I mean, it's one of the big issues in politics is the size of the government bureaucracy and budgets. And that means to the point of that government has taken over some of the charity that was done over the end of the days, that communities rise up themselves and do things. Well, now it's the expectation the government's going to take care of that.
It's funny, though, because at the same time, there are so many organizations to do the things that the government doesn't do.
And that breeds even more distrust. So if I say there's 2 million nonprofit organizations out there raising, when you see the report, or whether it's $500 billion, whatever it is,
right.
Well, how come things seem to be worse, or there's more problems than ever before? Now, granted, the society has changed along with it, the demographics and everything but it does raise the question that, we spend all this money, raise all this money, but or like the challenge like in homelessness in California, there are endemic issues around mental health and alcoholism and drug addiction, and we're part of it. We treat people, but it's not just providing shelter. These people are out of work. There's other issues, and that until you change some of your society dynamics, it's hard to solve them with just money and some type of temporary solution. I've talked about that, it's incredible the work that organizations and philanthropists have done in Africa. But there's still incredible problems and challenges, and it's based on their societies more so than, there's wars, and there's famine, and there's bad governments, and there's in the end of the day is that the society we are different than we were 20 years ago, 40 years ago, and it's not good or bad, but it's different. But you think it also certain organizations or sort of norms have not changed much about well, you just do the same thing over and over again. We ask for the year-end gift, and we're gonna, and like, certainly organizations have changed, but in the end of the day, is that the aspect of solving problems through philanthropy has become a much bigger challenge, and that's where this sort of trust comes in. That organizations do raise a lot of money. Well, they look at it in higher education. The tuition that I pay for my kids, out-of-state tuition, is way more, than the inflation rate. Yet the institution has billions of dollars in endowment. I mean,
how did you feel about that as a parent?
Mixed. I mean, I get it, but I looked at my, what it cost me to go to UVA in the late 1970s versus what I paid for Will. It was great. It was worth it, but it's way beyond any inflation rate, and yet they have all this money in endowments. I mean, and that they could fund everybody's tuition, and they ask for more money and more. And they build buildings and do stuff with it. But in the end of the day, it's even to the point where there's buzz about should we be taxing university endowments because they're just making so much money, and of course, and that also even fed the student loan problem because the universities were not on the hook. They don't have to pay it back, and so they got their money up front. The kids borrowed the money. The university got its huge tuition piece, and that's why even tuition's gone up because it gets subsidized through loans. Not even scholarship, loans, and they can charge, and then when the defaulted, and they want the government to step in and pay it, but the university didn't have to pay any of it back, so they're charging way more, but they're still getting paid. So so it creates and then people are coming out saying college education isn't worth it today. You can go online and you can learn stuff and do stuff, and you can get right into the tech world without wasting 4 years and $250,000. And do great. And so it's like, well, so even the point saying, well, here's these universities and say, give us money. And so even while you're paying tuition, give us more money, while your kid's in school. And like, it begins to, it rubs on people. It's like, it's hard to, and I see some of the stuff they're doing. So what's happened in this big donor crisis with the fewer donors, it's all about the big ones. It's all about mega philanthropy. I mean, it's great, and congratulations. And but the problem is there's a bigger competition for the big donors, and when this wealth transfer, when it goes on, will it end up really happening or not, or will it go elsewhere? And now they even like to say that today's generation can't buy houses, when are they ever going to be able to be a philanthropist? Except for the few who've made a lot of money in the world. Right, so we're dealing with huge societal changes, of which some things we certainly can't control.
Have you been able to control for it in a way, or adjust to it at Sharp?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. What we're proud of is we raise a lot of money and distribute. But when I got to Sharp, how few donors we really had. Because we had done the traditional kinds of send out some mail, have a cocktail party, write grants, do a few things. It was fine, all well and good, but we weren't tapping into the patient, relationship, and the grateful patients or the loyal patients. So that we have increased our number of donors by a pretty big factor, probably 5 or 6x on that, which has built a better pipeline. And so we've raised a lot of money. And I said, since I've been at Sharp, we've raised in excess of $500 million. And the biggest gift we've received is $10 million, which is really nice, but it's not like $50 million or $100 million.
But also you weren't running a capital campaign for a building.
And we did, some of that was campaign related, but we've gotten really great gifts, and a huge number in what we call the sweet spot of giving, say $250,000 to say $5 million, including deferred gifts and gifts of real estate and appreciated assets. So we've built both a pipeline, but also we've spread out that pyramid. The pyramid has really it's changed now to where, it used to be the 80-20, now it's 90-10. In some places, in a campaign, it's 95-5 or even 99-1. It's one person giving half the money, one donor, and the other half, and then the other one coming from less than 100 sources. Or, I used to do that in campaigns, saying you'll probably get at least around half your money from your top 10 donors. But now what you have is this reduction of the donor crisis about fewer people giving, which means the pipeline gets narrower, and then identifying and having enough major gift prospects for you is challenging, but now you're crowded by thousands of organizations who are looking to do the same thing. So it's like, it's the incredible Joan Kroc, from McDonald's, was here in San Diego. Great philanthropist. Everybody had Joan Kroc on their list, but very few. But they think because she was, and that's the thing, is that if you go to every community, well, who are the big donors here? And but then they go away. And then some of them, Conrad Prebys, who passed away recently, but has $1 billion foundation. Others, their money ends up, they're done, and they move. They don't have that. So, but who will be those people in the future?
So, what you now have been doing this work with Sharp, and not just the fundraising work, but preparing Sharp for the future.
Right.
How do you imagine that they will move forward after you choose to?
Hopefully similar to what we've laid out, this strategic philanthropy, where we really look at the three big fundamental forces of acquisition, retention, and growth of relationships, and that the institutional prioritization of philanthropy is, we look at ourselves as three companies. We're a operating company, a financing company, and an investment through philanthropy company, which is the great value proposition. But back to the point is that we want to continue to build a loyal family of donors of all sizes that will be loyal in their giving, we hope, for as long as we have them. And
it sounds like not just the donors that you've met over your tenure, but also the people who come in through that pipeline.
And those are relationships with physicians, with nurses, right, with executives. And in the end is that, Sharp treats 1 million people a year in one way or the other, inpatient, outpatient. That's our sort of prospect pool. We don't need a very large percentage of those people to become, we'd like to have as big as possible, but even a small percentage of 1 million people can be a big pipeline of relationships. And that's the thing, is that and that it is where patients can be like alumni. But even if you're not like even in any other organization, even like Santa Fe Christian Schools, my kids don't go to school there. And I even think they could probably do more with alumni parents than they're doing today, because their big focus is on when you're there, at maximizing parent giving. And that makes sense. I mean, most schools do that. And a lot of, when my kids are gone, like, well, as an alumni parent, I'm going to give it to UVA or I'm going to give it to Santa Fe Christian. But at the end of the day, I'll always have that relationship. But here's another interesting sort of point I thought. So, for a number of years, we supported a mission program in India, in which it was for basically a student to go to school and get trained, and we gave monthly contributions, and she went through her school, ultimately going to college, and she'd write us letters and thank it for all of that. And then it came to the end, and she graduated, and told us to send the story, thank you. And so, okay, well, we can stop. We've given her help, and so I thought, okay, we've done our kind of duty there. Or could we want another student? I said, no, we've done other stuff. So we made a fairly larger gift at the end and say, congratulations, she made it, it's her success here, and we're done. But for I don't know, 10 or 15 years, we gave them money, and I added up, and they should be absolutely satisfied that we've done our thing, and they don't need to keep going after us, because. And that's the thing, is your own personal philanthropic priorities might shift during your life. Even in our trust, in my estate, in our will and trust, it doesn't have a specific church in it. It just has the church that we're attending at the time of our death. We'll get a portion of that because you change potentially. I have UVA in there. I have Sharp Healthcare in there. I only have Sharp there because I work there. And so, it's like, but I might amend that, but there's, that kind of clause. And so I think that's the aspect, is that we all need to think about a donor journey that we can be part of, whether it's for their entire life or a period of time, or whatever and we have to go to the donors kind of orientation toward that versus, we got to have their annual gift every year. Oh, look, go chase them down because they lapsed. We even today we don't just look at, our annual donor rates. We look at we kind of think about our active donors that they made at least one gift in the last 3 years. And so they don't have to give every single year at the same time. We certainly have people who do that. So I think but I think we can do more of that. I think we can do better work there because we have access to all this information and we can communicate through so many platforms. And we're building a donor portal that's going to be tied to our Sharp database system with single sign-on, just like a bank or the airline, that you're going to have a personal, connectivity electronically, but it'll be much better than, sending you a statement in the mail that, whether or not you'll read it or not. So, it's kind of fun to be, in the stage of my career, to also be part of this incredible transformation. I mean, it's amazing to see my kids and others. I mean, just think of that who would have thought, TikTok influencers but the impact that it's having, it's that, and the viral nature of things. I mean, the ultimate thing was the ice bucket challenge, and that, that was almost like, a manna from heaven. It wasn't really the ALS. It was one guy who did it, and next thing you know, it's, Bill Gates doing it, on TV, and it may never happen again. And people try that, but you see some things on GoFundMe and things like. But then now they didn't get at all that. The GoFundMes of the world and these other third parties who want to take over the fundraising and do it for you, kind of thing. But the money goes through them, and they take a cut of it. And there's all of that. The third party fundraising firms and electronics, and the money isn't being given. It's given to this, and then they cut you the check and send you that was the whole Amazon Smile thing. That was the Amazon Smile thing. Was you got a check you didn't even know it was from. So you couldn't put it in your database. You couldn't go thank somebody. You got $247 because somebody bought something on Amazon.
So you're creating an environment where the relationship is with Sharp.
With the institution. Because they're giving to the institution. Not given to the foundation even. They're given to Sharp. Not given to me. And they're not given to the foundation. They're giving through the foundation to Sharp or to the Innovation and Education Center or at Sharp Healthcare or this program that Sharp is going to implement, and we're going to thank them for that and give them information. This is what this program did that you gave money to.
What I haven't asked you, the mission of Sharp as you describe it when you talk to people, because that's important. Once they bond with this, they're bonding with that mission.
Yeah, it's interesting. Right? I actually use the mission of I always say the mission of Sharp is to improve the health of the community with a commitment to excellence and all that we do. And I say, now look, there's one key word in that sentence. There's another piece to that about in different aspects. But the word improve, it's not take care of the community or care for, it's to improve the health.
Which is looking forward, it's not, yes.
Looking forward and investment grade. To improve, you have to invest in people, in facilities, and technology, and innovation. So we want to improve your health, not just take care of you, when you're sick or even just sort of baseline. So I said, I can tap into that saying, so you don't give to us because we need the money. You invest in us. You invest in Sharp, who's going to improve your healthcare and your neighbors and the community by its investing and your partnership. So we've really moved away from need pace. We need the money. We don't have enough, real charity. To we have a vision for the future, and we're going to invest, and we would like your partnership with us. And that's what goes back to the John D. Rockefeller speech of 1933. And then he said something: "Never be afraid to go to ask somebody as if you were asking them for a high-grade investment."
It strikes me that it's maybe economics was the perfect discipline because the way you describe these things, but also think about the innovations is very. It's heart-centered, sure, but it's very much about the metrics.
The return, we always talk the cost of fundraising, and,
right?
And I said, if I go to the board and say, you give me $1 and I give you $4 back when you stop giving me dollars, but then we flip it around on the investment side and say, look. Sharp is, and this is what we do in this big campaign we've just launched for the last few years. Sharp is investing $2 billion in the future of healthcare of San Diego. It's investing at Sharp, but it's for San Diego. It's for you. The foundation is facilitating a campaign to put in $250 million of that. The rest of that is coming from our operations, profit, efficiency, and borrowing and financing. So, I say, the best case statement for your organization is your bond issue. It's 100 pages. But they want people to buy 5,000 or 10,000 bonds of a $400 million bond issue. What is it? What's the return on investment? They're going to build all this stuff. You go in there and it lays out the entire thing and how profitable you are with this, all this, the vision and the plan, right? And we actually take that bond statement and use pieces of that. So even when we go to our donors and say, your gift is helping us improve our credit rating, which means we pay less interest, which means gift goes even farther. That's the economics, and big gifts come from sophisticated donors who know this stuff. You share that kind of business case or investment grade case, then it makes real sense. I mean, you see that in universities, they get big gifts for the future, big scholarships, or, they're going to build a new lab and do all this great stuff. A lot of research money ends up going right to the researcher, and they have to feed on that. And that's a real challenge to keep that going. But yeah, the end of the day is that we have a business case for philanthropy. That's what we said, is we leverage philanthropy. And so, and I think that's the other big thing, is that we always have to make sure we know that philanthropy and fundraising aren't the same. Philanthropy is the dynamic, it's this great legacy, it's the culture, it's the love of mankind. Fundraising is the function that we facilitate to create a great culture of philanthropy and dynamic. And so I think we have to make sure we manage that aspect too. So yeah, and that's been one of the biggest changes. I think that will stay after I leave, is we really change the aspect of philanthropy, the value proposition of philanthropy to improving healthcare in San Diego, versus we need money because it's just cost a lot to build something.
Right. You've definitely explained the why of it. And, as you talked about this, the other thing that I hearken back to is, and you mentioned this twice, about how you understood philanthropy through your family.
Right.
So what I'm curious about is the way maybe your children understand it.
Yeah, and actually it's pretty cool that, of course, our kids, grew up and going to church with us too. And of course they went to a school, a private school, where we donated and were very involved in the fundraising. And, and then they did some of that, for mission trips and things like that. But it was really great to see with both of them in college. Will was the philanthropy chair for his fraternity, and he organized a run that they did from UVA to Virginia Tech or whatever to raise money. And, he organized stuff, and he asked me questions about that. And he realized the value of that. And he was, of the fact that, giving back. And he went to his first kind of charity event in New York a few months ago. And actually Lauren is now the, treasurer and, kind of fundraising person for her music sorority at Belmont. And she sent me a text about asking questions about, should they, if they wanted to do something to help kids at a hospital, and writing letters, and how might best we, go about raising the money for that. And so, so both of them, are doing things like that. But they also, they did volunteer work, at Santa Fe, whether it was stuff in the seed bags, or they did some things because Santa Fe had mission work that it did, and they both went on mission trips that not so much about raising, but they helped the communities, the people, communities in need. Will went to Uganda, and Lauren went to downtown LA and the homeless projects and stuff. So yeah, and then they've come to enough of the sharp events too, that and what's really kind of interesting or fun is, so we built our new innovation center, and we built the Center for Philanthropy. And so I asked I wanted a closing room for the people to ask for gifts, and they call it a library, but it's the closing room where you private meetings, sign agreements and stuff. So we decided to pay for that, to fund it, and we put our name on the plaque, and it's all four of us. It's myself, my wife, Lauren, and Will are named on that. And I have the quote. I have my quote on there, which is a favorite one I use, which is, "The true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit." So actually, when we first opened it up and the kids were home, they came down and had lunch, and we took our picture in front of the plaque, the four of us kind of standing there in front of the plaque. And they're like, I think they're pretty proud of the fact that, and it was so funny that, Lauren had surgery at Sharp. She had a brachial cleft cyst removed back in March or so. And she ended up on the floor where we had named one of the staff lounges. So when they wheeled her down the corridor to her patient room, they said, "Hey, Lauren, there's your parents' name on the wall." They said, "That's pretty cool." So they've had enough, but they've done them their own, but they've had a lot of exposure to that, and they've, participated in events, and even Lauren, she volunteered for the Arts for Healing program, and during her senior in high school, she played the piano in the lobby of the hospital on weekends for several hours. They had a piano donated there, and the patients and the staff would come and sit around, and so she's, I think that's it. That's you don't have to sit down and teach them. You have to show them. I mean, and that's the thing I think too, is that, they talk about that. I've talked about that. They talk about that in surgeons, is that, learn one, do one, teach one. So we all have to learn the major gift process from others. Then we got to go do it and then teach others to do it. And so I think a lot of philanthropy has to be done that way, that, to learn it, do it, and then teach others to do it. Because where else would they're doing it themselves and we're out of a textbook is. So I think, it's the aspect of exposure to that. Now, whether they go on and what their orientation will be but I think that's, but it's good. It's fun to see them that way. And I think they're proud of the fact that the family has been involved in doing stuff like this, and so and the charitable nature of things. Yeah, it's pretty good to see. So we'll see what happens next. But but again, I look back, it was my family that, both from the standpoint of like giving to church, but also volunteerism. My mom would paint crosses for the Memorial Day service at the Legion. My dad was the commander of the Legion post, and they'd sell oranges and grapefruits in the wintertime in boxes of them to raise money for the Legion post, and we'd be up there moving the boxes around as kids, and I didn't want to do it, but you really realize what they were doing it for and all of that. And so you don't realize at the time, I don't want to do this, Dad. Just like, well, but you got to help out, kind of thing. So and I think we have to get to more right than that. We have to philanthropy and people giving money away. It's wait a second. I mean, it's like, why would we do that, kind of thing? And so it's a learned response. And so are we doing the generational kind of teaching and training? How are we going to get Gen X or Gen Y? I'm like, well, it's going to have to be people who are older than they are, who've done it. And then, and the reality is that the biggest giving comes when you have discretionary income. It doesn't come when you're right out of college. So what I gave Will for his graduation present was a lifetime membership in the Alumni Association at UVA. Just paid for it. It wasn't that much, but so he's now a lifetime member. So that's nice for him. He can, whether he decides to do other stuff, that's going to be up to him. But so that was and then we've joined the Parents Council at Belmont, which is a giving and engagement program. So, so we'll have we've shifted from Santa Fe Christian, that obviously UVA for some, with the McIntyre School, and then also in Belmont. But when Lauren graduates, not going to do that anymore. We might go to some performance, but that's the thing, is that you also got to work with people in their giving dynamics. First, it's like, this is a big priority or not.
It's their journey.
Yeah, it's all of our journeys.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Philanthropy Masterminds podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Sharp Healthcare, go to sharp.com. Our thanks to our sponsor, DonorSearch, the world leader in AI and donor research for nonprofit fundraising, and our producer, Jack Frost. If you like what you heard, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, the DonorSearch YouTube channel, or wherever you like to listen, and consider giving us a like and a positive review so others can find us too. Check out our live webinars on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and come back next weekend for another interview with a leader in the world of social good. Until then, this is Jay Frost. Thanks for joining us. See you soon.